All right, let me ask you to open your Bibles, please. 2 Samuel chapter 8. 2 Samuel chapter 8, and that's going to be the passage that we go to first. We do have quite a number of passages that I want to look at. Some of the passages will read more verses than others. Sometimes it's just going to be a verse here and a verse there. But we are going to be flipping around a good bit tonight, and so keep your Bible handy. And I would like to encourage you to follow along with us. And this message tonight, we're going to be looking at a part 2 of our synopsis of the section of the time on Israel's prophetic timeline that we're following through the scriptures. Again, looking at this interlude of mercy and blessing that we started last week. And we're going to be in that section again. And we're going to be talking about this period that the Lord gives to Israel during the reigns of King David and King Solomon. And we said last time that that's about a 80 to 100 year period of time on the calendar. And we're starting that from the anointing of David that we looked at last time. That begins back here in 1 Samuel 16 and running over through 1 Kings chapter 11 is the scripture that we've matched up with this period that we're calling the interlude of mercy and blessing. And last week we spent the hour, for the most part, just kind of surveying the historical flow of events through that time. We talked about the merciful basis of the interlude of mercy and blessing, of course, and how that's not part of what was promised Israel by the law. It was just God invoking that legal reserve clause and showing goodness to them that they didn't deserve, even though they had merited more cursing and more chastisement under the law and deserved more chastening. The Lord in His mercy gives them this period of really unprecedented prosperity and blessing here in the reigns of David and Solomon. And we were looking at the merciful basis for that. And again, a bird's eye view of this 100-year period of time where we looked at some of the high points that are documented for us in the scripture, running there from 1 Samuel 16 over to 1 Kings chapter 11. And I didn't mention this last week, but I think it's probably good for me to insert here that the time frame is, since we're matching up chapters and books and things with the interlude of mercy, it's probably good for me to insert for you and to say also that the time frame that we're covering, it's also recorded in God's Word from 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verse 1, over through 2 Chronicles chapter 9 and verse 31. And of course, if you're familiar with those books of Samuel and the 2 books of Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and you've read through those, you probably recall that there's some parallel history that goes on there. And you almost have 2 accounts of a lot of things that take place in this period between Samuel and Kings, and then over again in Chronicles, you'll find a similar passage that'll say a lot of similar things. And so a parallel history in the Chronicles that matches back up with portions of 2 Samuel and the 2 books of Kings, of course, and the really from the reign of David forward in this collective overall period that's going to be the kings, right? The reign of the kings in Israel. And so we've got those passages as well. So 1 Chronicles 10:1 through 2 Chronicles 9:31. And that's 1 Chronicles 10, that's cutting in at the end of the reign of Saul, right? When David's coming to the throne. So you don't have a lot of that stuff that's in the second half of 1 Samuel in the Chronicles. But from the reign of David and forward into Solomon and following, you do have that parallel history over there. And so that leads to some really interesting comparisons when you start comparing the accounts between the books. And a lot of interesting things that are recorded there. We won't get into that a whole lot in this series, but God has a reason for why He does that in His Word the way He does. Takes you through it once and then almost circles back in the Chronicles and goes over it again. And part of that reason, at least in my understanding, is that in the books of the Kings, He's giving you those events from the perspective of a king, the history from a king's perspective, whereas Chronicles is more from a prophet's perspective. And you've got kind of that religious tint to the history. Same events, but seeing it through a different pair of eyes. And so some differences that are seen there and witnessed as you compare the passages. But so an interesting study in and of itself, but needless to say, there's overlap in those periods. And so I say that because as we're going through this next section, and really for the next several lessons as we're working through the interlude of mercy and things that follow it, you're probably going to find that we're flipping back and forth between Kings and Chronicles and Samuel a good bit. And the reason for that is because of the parallel history, like I've tried to summarize for you here. And so that is important for us to take note of. Now, we ended last week, and I gave you three major characteristics of the interlude of mercy and blessing. And this section of the timeline of what was going on in Israel overall in this interlude of mercy. And I said to you that there were three major characteristics that we were going to talk about that really fit into this block of time here. And I said that the first thing that we see is rest. Israel experiences rest from their enemies, a time of peace. You can see that I've got them listed up here. Rest from their enemies. The second thing is the establishment of national righteous rule. And then the third thing that we're going to see is national prosperity. And we'll talk about some of the components of that prosperity. But those three main headings that serve as our bullet points, if you will, for the overall character of what God's going to be doing with Israel during this period of time. Okay? And so tonight what we're going to do, as I promised you, is we're going to go back through those three things and start putting some verses to it and noting how that those three things really do characterize this time. Again, a lot of detail that goes beyond this, but just summary bullet points, if you will, to get the general sense of what's taking place in the reigns of David and Solomon. Okay? And so that's where we're going to begin tonight. And so going back up to our first one here, we're going to talk about the interlude of mercy and blessing as it relates to rest from Israel's enemies. Rest from Israel's enemies. We're talking about rest in the terms of peace. And we said last time, and I kind of gave you a little bit of an introduction to it, and we said that this rest from their enemies, it's brought about through really a reversal of what they had been experiencing up to this point, especially in the first course of punishment. We've looked at the history on that as Israel goes away from the law, those things that were promised to come upon them as part of the curses. Part of that involved their enemies coming in upon them. Right? They're not able to stand before their enemies. They don't have rest. There's continual turmoil on their borders in various locations as the people that surround them are coming in and they're taking their cities, spoiling their goods. Right? They're going to sow their seed in vain because their enemies eat it. You got those border raids and those types of things that are going on. And that had been Israel's experience back here in the first course of punishment. Right? So as we get into the interlude of mercy and we're transitioning out of that, God giving them all these things in His mercy to them, we're going to see those curses and the onslaught of their enemy beginning to be rolled back, and a reversal really of what they had been experiencing up to this point. And instead of being in turmoil, they're at rest. And their enemies are quiet. And of course, as we said last time, that's not a cut and dry, just one day it's all enemy and the next day you're all at peace. There's that gradual growth, right? As David is raised up, he's anointed as king, and he begins to go out and to fight Israel's battles and to go out and wage war against their enemies. He begins to beat them back over a process of time as he's coming to the throne, and even after he's come to the throne, a period of time in which he's subduing Israel's enemies, putting enemies under his feet, as it were, to bring about this time that is peaceful and that's restful. And you see it in a real way, especially in the reign of Solomon. And because of David's warfare and how he's driving back their enemies, you really see that peace coming to the forefront in the reign of Solomon following him. And so a gradual thing that's being built up here as David's coming to the throne. And I've called you to 2 Samuel chapter 8 because I think that we can see here some things that David does. And this is at the point where he has come to the throne. He of course, he had been anointed in Hebron of Judah back in chapter 2, reigned there for 7.5 years, and eventually comes to be king over all the tribes of Israel back in chapter 5. And here in chapter 8, we're going to see the full establishment of David's kingdom and some of his exploits as he's going back and beating back Israel's enemies in a reversal of that first course of punishment to bring about this period of rest. And so 2 Samuel chapter 8, beginning in verse number 1, it says, "And after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them." Right, so Israel's enemies are being subdued. They're overrunning their enemies rather than their enemies overrunning them. "And David took Metheg Ammah out of the hand of the Philistines." Right, so before they're losing territory, David's going out and fighting and he's recovering it. restoring and rolling back what they had lost under the first course of punishment. Verse 2 says that he smote Moab, and he measured them with a line, casting them down to the ground, even with 2 lines measured he to put to death, with 1 full line to keep alive. And so the Moabites became David's servants and brought gifts, become tributaries. Verse 3, David smote also Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, as he went to recover his border at the river Euphrates. And David took from him 1,000 chariots and 700 horsemen and 20,000 footmen. And David houghed all the chariot horses and reserved of them for 100 chariots. And when the Syrians of Damascus came to succor Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David slew the Syrians 22,000 men. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became servants to David and brought gifts. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And David took the shields of gold that were on the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. And from Beta and from Berothai, the cities of Hadadezer, King David took exceeding much brass. When Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had smitten all the host of Hadadezer, then Toi sent Joram his son unto King David to salute him and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and smitten him. For Hadadezer had wars with Toi. And Joram brought with him vessels of silver and vessels of gold and vessels of brass, which also King David did dedicate unto the Lord with the silver and the gold that he dedicated of all nations which he subdued. Okay, so he's subdued some nations, and he goes on to list some out here. Verse 12, he says, of Syria, and of Moab, and of the children of Ammon, and of the Philistines, and of Amalek, and of the spoil of Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah. And David gat him a name when he returned from smiting the Syrians in the valley of Salt, being 18,000 men. And he put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went, and David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. Now, 15 verses there, which you see David going out and literally beating back the enemies that have been encroaching upon the borders of Israel. He's taking back cities. He's subduing these various people that surround Israel. They're becoming his servants, right? They're serving David, bringing him gifts, as it says, becoming tributaries, paying their gifts of taxes, as it were, the revenues of David's kingdom. He's putting these people to tribute. And all of that, as you just look at the things that's described there that David's doing to Israel's enemies, are an exact flip of what we had seen happening to Israel back here. In the first course of punishment, Israel was on the receiving side of that kind of thing. Their enemies are coming in and putting them to tribute. They're becoming their enemies' servants, serving the Philistines and the Moabites and all those people that would come in at various times and put the people to tribute. David now is flipped the coin, so to speak, and he's turned the tables on them, so that now he's going out, he's driving them back out of Israel, and he's putting these people to tribute, he's receiving their gifts, and you've almost got a flipped situation, really, from what Israel's been experiencing back here. And so it's bringing about this rest where the first course of punishment issues are being reversed. And you see the terminology all down through this chapter here. He smote the Philistines and subdued them. He smote Moab, and they became his servants and brought gifts. It says at one place that he went to recover his border at the Euphrates. Right? He's reclaiming land that their enemies had taken, and he's destroying their things. And you get down to verse 11, all the nations that he subdued. And, you look almost every verse down through there, it's just, enemy after enemy after enemy that is being submitted to David as his kingdom is expanding and his empire is beginning to grow, until you come down to the 15th verse there. It says that David reigned over all Israel, and he executed judgment and justice unto all his people. And so you're seeing an establishment and really a stronghold of the kingdom that's now being set up in the land. Complete reversal of what had been taking place in the first course of punishment. And as a result of these exploits, as David's gone out and he's begun to subdue their enemies, and there's been a reversal of the first course of punishment, what you have as a natural result of that is Israel experiencing rest from their enemies. Okay? And we're going to see that. It begins with David's reign, and it's going to continue through Solomon's. And so we want to note that and see that in some scriptures that correspond to the reigns of both of these men. Okay, so starting with David then, if you just skip back one chapter here to chapter 7, kind of cutting into the middle of the thought here, and we'll end with verse 1, but just wanted to pick out this here in chapter 7, verse 1. As the chapter begins, it says, "And it came to pass when the king sat in his house, and it came to pass when the king sat in his house, and the Lord had given him rest round about from all his enemies, that the king said unto Nathan," and so on he goes there. My point in bringing you there is to show you verse 1. David sitting in his house at a particular time when it says that the Lord had given him rest round about from all his enemies. There's been periods of war. David's still fighting wars, but there comes a time when the Lord gives him that rest that we're talking about. He's got peace from his enemies. They're not stirring against him, but he's put them under his feet. They're subdued. There's rest. You look at verse 11 here of the same chapter. Back up to verse 10. He says, "Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, and move no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. And as since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and have caused thee to rest from all thine enemies. And also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee an house." The Lord has caused him to rest from all his enemies. As David is sitting upon the throne there in his house, he's experienced that. Now, if you jump over to 1 Chronicles in chapter 22. 1 Chronicles 22, here the Lord is speaking to David, but he's speaking of really the blessing that has begun with David and what's going to be continuing as Solomon comes to the throne. And the Lord promising this issue of rest and peace to be carried on with David's son. 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 9. He says here, "Behold, a son shall be born to thee, who shall be a man of rest." Note that terminology, the man of rest. "A son shall be born to thee, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies round about. For his name shall be Solomon, and I will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his days." Here the Lord talking to David about the son that's going to be born and going to sit upon his throne. What's coming after David? Right? David's been a man of war. He's been waging wars. And there's come a time when he's got rest. And the Lord's promised him that in the days of his son, when his son comes to sit upon his throne, that there's going to be peace and quietness in the land of Israel. In fact, Solomon's name, you know what it means? It means peace and quietness. He's a man of rest, as it says. A man of peace, as it were. His reign is, for the most part, peaceful. He's got the rest from their enemies. Now, just to supplement that, you see the man of rest terminology there in 22:9. If you look over quickly to 28 of this book, 1 Chronicles 28 and verse 3. Just wanted to point out some terminology to you here that I mentioned last week, but you can actually see the phrases in the verses here. This is speaking of David here in chapter 28 and verse 3. It says, "But God said unto me, Thou shalt not build an house for my name, because thou hast been," here it is, "a man of war, and hast shed blood." David's wanting to build the temple at this time, and the Lord has prohibited him from doing that. He says that he's not going to allow David to do it, but his son's going to do it. And part of the reason that he's given for not allowing David to do that, even though that's in his heart, he says, because you've been a man of war. And so David, you've got the man of war. With Solomon, you've got the man of rest. And because of the warfares and because of what David did through the warfare that he was raging against Israel's enemies, that enables Solomon to come to the throne and have this period of peace and rest from their enemies. So you've got the man of war resulting in the man of rest in the kingdom in Israel. And those two go together in that way. And so when Solomon comes on the throne, the Lord said that he's going to give peace and quietness unto Israel in the days of Solomon, that king of peace, as it were. Look at 1 Kings chapter 4. As we get into the reign of Solomon, you're going to see that this issue of peace does come to pass. Just as the Lord had said, that was the characteristic of Solomon's reign. 1 Kings chapter 4, and beginning in verse 24 here. 1 Kings 4:24. Says of Solomon, for he had dominion over all the regions on this side of the river, from Tifsah even to Azzah, over all the kings on this side of the river, and he had peace on all sides round about, and Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his fig and under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. So from those verses, what's the character of Solomon's reign? What's going on in his time? He's got peace from all his enemies round about. They're able to sit down under their vine and under their fig tree and relax because they don't have enemies coming in and spoiling them. Right? The first course of punishment has been rolled back, and it's a time of peace during Solomon's reign. Look at chapter 5. 1 Kings 5:1. It says, and Hiram king of Tyre sent his servants unto Solomon, for he had heard that they had appointed him king in the room of his father, for Hiram was ever a lover of David. And Solomon sent to Hiram, saying, thou knowest how that David my father could not build an house unto the name of the Lord his God, for the wars which were about him on every side, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. Right? So there's that man of war concept, subduing the enemies. Lord puts them under his feet. He's got that warfare going on. He says, verse 4, but now, as a direct result of that, what's going on in Israel under Solomon's reign is something different than that. It's not the wars and the enemy invasion. He says, but now the Lord my God hath given me rest on every side, so that there is neither adversary nor evil occurrent. Sounds like a peaceful time to me, doesn't it? Yeah. Their enemies are not stirring up against them. They're not having these constant skirmishes all the time. They've got rest from their enemies in the reign of Solomon. Keep going here over to chapter 8. 1 Kings 8 and verse 56. Solomon's blessing after his prayer here in 8:56. He says, blessed be the Lord that hath given rest unto his people Israel, according to all that he promised. There hath not failed one word of all his good promise, which he promised by the hand of Moses, his servant. So he's talking about rest once again. He's got rest in his reign. And so this rest that they're experiencing, I would say that's a blessing upon Israel, isn't it? If their enemy is coming in and encroaching on their borders back here, as we saw, it was a part of the curse of the law. If that's not happening and instead they've got rest from their enemies, that's a blessing instead of a curse. Okay? Something they didn't deserve, right? It's that mercy that's bringing that about. And in mercy, what the Lord's done here is he's given them rest for their enemies, as the brother said that they don't deserve. You realize that's a blessing. That was a blessing that was talked about in the law. It was just a blessing that they never received because they couldn't keep the law. All right. You go back to Leviticus 26 real quick. I just want to show you this. And I'm doing this because what I want you to see is that in mercy, the Lord is giving them the blessing that they never could get by their performance. God's giving them a blessing outside of their performance. And here in Leviticus 26, you've actually got the scriptures that tells them that if they can obey and keep the law, that they can have this blessing of rest from their enemies. Leviticus 26, back up to verse 6. This is the blessing part of the chapter. Conditional contract of the law. If they're obedient, verse 6 says, and I will give peace in the land. And ye shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will rid evil beasts out of the land, neither shall the sword go through your land. And ye shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. For I will have respect unto you, and make you fruitful, and multiply you, and establish my covenant with you. So as part of the law, they could have the blessing of rest from their enemies, but they had to be obedient. They weren't obedient, and instead of having that blessing, they got the curse where their enemies are overrunning them. But now in mercy, God has given them a blessing that they couldn't ever attain to by the law. That they couldn't become what they said they would be by the law when it was based upon them and their performance. But in mercy, the Lord is blessing them with those blessings that were unattainable by their performance. He says, I'm going to give you rest from your enemies. We see that coming on strong, beginning with the reign of David and carrying on and increasing in the reign of Solomon. Deuteronomy 28:7 is another verse that you can match up with Leviticus. It's talking about those blessings that they're now experiencing on the basis of mercy. And so what do they experience in this time? They experience rest from their enemies round about. Time of peace. Number 2. This time, the interlude of mercy is characterized by national righteous rule. The establishment of national righteous rule over all Israel. Now, we know that Israel has had some leaders in the past in their history. Of course, the period preceding this, we know about the judges. God had raised up judges at various times that would judge the people for, a span of years, various spans of years. But with the judges, a thing that's important to keep in mind is that those judges were very territorial. They weren't overseeing the whole of the nation Israel. A lot of times these enemies would come in at certain parts of the land, and God would raise up a judge, and he would deal with those enemies and judge in a certain area of Israel. And some of the judges overlap in their ministries and their timing, and it's a very fragmented system, if you will, back here in the judges. Territorial in nature and the oversight. We know Samuel had come along there in the book of 1 Samuel. They get to that point of the history back there, and he had established a circuit ministry where he went around to about 3 different stops within a year, and he would teach the people, and the law of the Lord and the light of the law began to flourish in Israel once again. And he had done that in response really to some reformations that needed to take place with Shiloh there, with what had gone on before with Eli and his sons and all that. And that had an impact, and that was quite a significant ministry in Israel. But even that and what Samuel had done, as good as it was still pretty limited in scope. Well, when you get to this period and David's coming to the throne, what you have now is a centralized head, as it were, that's bringing about a unification of what had before been a nation of loosely held together tribes. You've got a central government, so to speak, that's more capable of organizing their forces, going out before them and leading them in and bringing them out as they describe it. You've got a unification and the establishment of rule in Israel to unify them as a nation under a central head. Now we know that Israel's past, before the judges even, back here in Egypt, God had raised up Moses. He sent Moses and Aaron, and Moses for a large part there in Egypt, and even in the wilderness after that, he was the one with the authority over the nation. Right? Moses was the lawgiver. They came to Moses with their disputes and their questions, and he gave judgment. And he's the one that led Israel. They had leadership back there when they came out of Egypt in the wilderness. We know that they had Joshua after that wilderness wandering, as they're going to begin to go into the land. And Joshua goes before them. He's appointed of the Lord to lead them. And they've got a central head that they're rallying around. And Joshua's giving the orders, and they're following him. And they're doing pretty well through this time. But when you come into the period of the judges, that central authority figure, so to speak, is kind of non-existent. Again, you've got the judges that are just kind of territorial. Yeah. And so you kind of lose that whole unification issue. And that really, when you think about it, this first course of punishment, that's really part of their own fault. Because when they decided to go under the law, what did they say? They've been called to be that kingdom of priests and holy nation, and they said, all the Lord has spoken, we will do. We don't need the Lord. Right? The Lord's supposed to be their king. We don't need the Lord. We'll do it. We're capable of becoming the kingdom of priests and the holy nation and flourishing into that on the basis of our performance. And the Lord said, all right, have at it. He gives them an opportunity at that. And How's that go? Not well. All right, they don't do good. They have a go of it at their own, and they become very fragmented, very scattered and destroyed. You know, Moses knew that was going to be the case before he died. He knew that this issue of Israel functioning on their own was never going to work out. And when he gets to this time here at the end of the wilderness wanderings, he prays the Lord. He actually beseeches the Lord that, knowing that he's about to die, that the Lord would appoint a man, set a man over the people of Israel. And he asked for that. And of course, the Lord answers that prayer and gives him Joshua. But Moses prayed that at the end of his life, before he dies, he said, set a man over the people. Why? He says, that they be not as sheep which have no shepherd. If they don't have that central authority and organization, they're just going to be as sheep with no shepherd. They're going to end up scattered. They're just left to the wild beasts to come in and to pick them off, and they'll run off a cliff. And that's exactly what had happened here, wasn't it? After Joshua was passed off the scene, they're in here, it's just like sheep without a shepherd. And at the end of the book of Judges, it says that in not the same terminology, but on several occasions at the end of Judges, I think it's about 4 times in chapters 17 to 21, it'll come along here and it'll say, what their problem was? It was during these days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. They don't have centralized leadership here. They don't have the establishment of righteous rule. Everybody's just doing whatever's right in their own eyes. And because there's no king, there's no shepherd to go in before them and to lead them out and to carry them through and to perform those things that they've had in the past, they end up scattered, don't they? Amen. They're left to the beasts. And the Gentiles, those nations likened unto beasts, come in and they scatter the sheep. That's what they've been experiencing at this time. Because of that loosely held together tribal nation that they were, didn't have that leadership. Just these territorial judges through this time, as they're under the law and they're experiencing the curses of that. But now, however, as you come into the interlude of mercy, you've got the Lord's king that he's set upon the throne, and he's got national righteous rule established in Israel once again. There's a leader. There's a shepherd that God set over them. Didn't the Lord take David out of the sheep field? The sheep pasture back there in 1 Samuel 16, when Samuel came and anointed him, they had to call him from tending to the sheep. He takes him out of that pasture and sets him upon a throne to oversee the flock of the nation Israel. And under David, you have this establishment of righteous rule in Israel. Look at some verses here on David. If you look back to chapter 5 of 2 Samuel 5, this is the chapter where he is going to be anointed as king over all Israel, and he takes Jerusalem for the capital here. In 2 Samuel 5 and verse 10, the scripture says, "And David went on and grew great, and the Lord God of hosts was with him. And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David an house." Verse 12, "And David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake." You got a kingdom established in the land now, don't you? In view of what's taking place and the fact that, the king of Tyre now is coming to make a peace covenant with David, as it were, David perceives at this particular time, after he's been anointed king over all Israel, right? He's the king over all the tribes now, that the Lord has established him king over Israel and exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. Back in chapter 8, the verse we read a minute ago, 8:15, it says that David reigned over all Israel. And David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. It's not just a portion. It's not just a territory. It's all Israel now, unified under their shepherd king. Righteous rule being established. 1 Chronicles chapter 14, similar to the one we just read, but use a little different terminology here. 1 Chronicles 14, verse 1. It says, "Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and timber of cedars, and masons, and carpenters, to build him an house." Verse 2, "And David perceived that the Lord had confirmed him king over Israel, for his kingdom was lifted up on high because of his people Israel. Second Samuel there used the term established his kingdom. Here in Chronicles, it's using the term confirmed. He confirmed his kingdom. Well, the root word of confirmed, it's firm. Right? Established. It's made firm. And that concept's together. It's firm together, as it were. He's confirmed it. He's brought the nation together. This loosely held together tribal nation that they are in the Judges. It's coming to a firm establishment with David as their king. Righteous rules established. Unification taking place.
Amen.
Let's look at Solomon. Skip over to 1 Kings chapter 2. 1 Kings chapter 2. I know it's a lot of verses, but hopefully it's sampling that's giving you the idea to bolster the points that we're trying to make here as we're looking just at the characteristics of the time. 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 12. David has passed away now. Solomon coming to the throne. 1 Kings 2:12, it says, Then sat Solomon upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was established greatly. His kingdom was established greatly. All right. 1 Chronicles again. 29, all the way at the end of the book. 1 Chronicles 29. First Chronicles 29, beginning at verse 23. It says, Then Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord as king instead of David his father, and prospered, and all Israel obeyed him. Now, I just point out to you, we read the verse there. He said, you notice how it says that Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord there? It was the throne of David, but he says it was the throne of the Lord. Think about God's purpose with Israel and what he's meant to do with them in the land. See? Recognize whose throne it actually is. It's the throne of the Lord. Solomon sitting upon the throne of the Lord in the stead of David his father, and prospered, and all Israel obeyed him. Verse 24, And all the princes, and the mighty men, and all the sons likewise of King David, submitted themselves unto Solomon the king, and the Lord magnified Solomon exceedingly in the sight of all Israel, and bestowed upon him such royal majesty as had not been on any king before him in Israel. All the servants, all the people, all the tribes, after David's died, you've got this transition period, they're all submitting to Solomon. Righteous rule, centralized rule established in Israel. Turn the page here, 2 Chronicles, chapter 1.
Should be 29:23.
Yeah, that was 1 Chronicles 29:23 to 25, I just read. And now 2 Chronicles chapter 1 and verse 1. And Solomon the son of David was strengthened in his kingdom, and the Lord his God was with him and magnified him exceedingly. Again, establishment of the righteous rule. If you want to take notes, you can jot down Isaiah 1:21. We read it last week. Righteousness lodging in Jerusalem. It's called the faithful city. Isaiah 1:21 and 26 is another cross-reference for this. And so we see the establishment of righteous rule. They've got a shepherd once again that's going out before them. They're not as sheep having no shepherd. They're a sheep now having a shepherd. And they're beginning to prosper. And they're beginning to be drawn together and unified as a nation under their king. We see that coming to the forefront in the reigns of David and Solomon. And then finally, the third thing here we see, a characteristic of this time, is national prosperity. A time of national prosperity for the people of Israel. Now, when we say national prosperity, that means several different things. That's got different aspects to it. I know a lot of times in our culture, unfortunately, when we talk about prosperity, we tend to only think of that in one way. We think of financial prosperity. Riches, monetary type of thing. And that's certainly an aspect of prosperity. That's an aspect of prosperity that we are going to see as part of this. And so it's not excluded, but we got to be careful that when we say national prosperity, that we don't limit ourselves to think only the issue of finances and resources, okay? Because there's more to it than that. And when we talk about Israel's national prosperity, we got to remember who we're talking about. We're talking about God's chosen people, God's nation on the earth that has been called in connection with a specific purpose. They're supposed to function as a kingdom of priests and holy nation in the Lord's kingdom. That's who they are as a nation. And that's who the Lord had created them to be and what they were to do. And really, that's their only purpose for existence, right? Because the Lord took Abraham out from among those nations that he had given up at Babel, and he said, I'm going to make of you a great nation, and promises Abraham some things specifically in connection with what God's purpose to do on the earth.
Amen.
He created Israel for his glory. That's why he calls them Israel, my glory. They have glory in connection with his calling for them in that kingdom. And so when we talk about national prosperity for Israel, and Israel specifically, in view of who they are and what they've been called to be, the prosperity that we're talking about goes beyond financial prosperity, and there's a glory that's to be associated with that. When Israel's prospering, they're prospering in connection with who they have been called to be and what they've been called to do, a glory that flourishes in all manner of good things, so that when the word of it begins to spread and that begins to increase and grow, it doesn't stay contained there within the borders of Israel, but there's an impact and an influence that's felt throughout the earth and the other nations of the Gentiles that are out there. It's always been God's purpose with Israel. Yeah, the glory of God, and having the darkness of the Gentiles be impacted by the light of Israel, and to have things going on in Israel there, and to have that glory resident in the land with his people Israel, that when the nations hear about it, it's causing them to flow unto Israel, to come to Israel and to see the glory and to behold it and to ultimately come to know who the true and living God is. All they've got out there in their darkness is the vanities, the idols, the Baal system of Babel in its various forms. That's all that they know. Idol-worshiping Gentiles, that because of the glory and the blessing that's going on in Israel, when they hear of that, they see something in Israel that they don't have out there amongst their idols and their vanities, and they flow to Israel, and they come to know that true and living God for who he is. They find the oracles of God in Israel when they get there. The law of God, the light of God, and they come to the knowledge of the truth. God intended the prosperity of Israel to impact the nations. And so it's more than just a financial prosperity. Yes, that's part of it, right? In the form of land and wealth, as we're going to see. Those are financial issues and possessions and material issues, and that's a part of it. But the design of that's not just for Israel's prosperity in that sense, but it's so that they would have this third issue, which is influence and impact with the nations. He's doing these things so that it gets the attention of the nations, so that they come to find out what's going on, and when they get there, they come to the knowledge of the true God by that influence, that impact, and those oracles of the Lord in his word that they've given. And so national prosperity involves all those things. And this is a time in Israel where the Lord is blessing them with all three of these things. He's going to bless them with more land. And that started with David as he's recovering his border. The land is going to begin to increase. They're going to have more wealth as riches are multiplied there in the land. But they're also, as a result of that, going to have more influence and impact upon the nations as they start to hear about it. And all those three of those things are part of Israel's national prosperity. Now, first issue here, let's talk about the land. We know the land was promised to Abraham back in Genesis. We know that the land was conquered in part by Joshua. They begin to divide it up once they come in. And the idea was that they were going to continue to conquer little by little and have the land area expand over a period of time. But instead of following the Lord and seeing that, they transgressed the law, and that land, even that they had begun to possess here under Joshua, instead of it expanding, it begins to contract. They begin to lose cities here and there, having their border eroded at certain places and at various times. And there was a shrinkage rather than an expansion. And David, through those exploits that he's gone on to, here is after he's anointed, he begins fighting Israel's battles. He's beginning to recover that. And that land is beginning to expand once again. And he begins to push the border out, and the land mass begins to expand. And you can see that, and we've already read the passage on David there in 2 Samuel chapter 8, verses 12 to 15, where it talks about all of his successful battles and how they subdued those enemies in all these areas, and he's expanding the border of the land. If you look at 1 Kings chapter 4 here, in Solomon's reign, you're going to see that he maintains it. David had reclaimed it, but Solomon maintains it. 1 Kings 4:21. It says that Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines, and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life. And Solomon's provisions for one day was 30 measures of fine flour, and 80 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen, and 20 oxen out of the pastures, and 100 sheep, beside harts and roebucks, and fallow deer, and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region on this side the river, from Tiphsah even to Azza, over all the kings on this side the river, and he had peace on all sides round about. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. It's describing his borders, expansive borders, as the land has increased, and Solomon maintaining it there all his days, as it says. Psalm 72, a psalm for David. David will say that his son's going to reign from sea to sea, right? So he's maintaining the land as it's increased during this time. Not only an expansion of land, but they have more wealth. More wealth. With David, you can see just a verse here, 1 Chronicles 29 again. Of course, David gets him a name, and he's got his fame. But it does make a mention of the fact that he had riches, that he's increased by the time that he's passing away and Solomon's going to take over. 1 Chronicles 29:28 again. Speaking of David, it says, and he died in a good old age, full of days, riches, and honor. And Solomon, his son, reigned in his stead. So when he dies, he's got riches, doesn't he? The wealth has begun to increase in David's time, and that only gets expanded and really exploded by Solomon, as he's able to transact business, as it were, in the time of peace, and prosperity begins to flourish. If you jump over to look at 2 Chronicles chapter 1, this is pretty amazing here. 2 Chronicles 1 and 15. Solomon's come to the throne at this point. Notice what it says here about Solomon and his days and what happened here. 2 Chronicles 1:15, it says, and the king, that's Solomon, made silver and gold at Jerusalem as plenteous as stones. And cedar trees made he as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. Silver and gold as stones at Jerusalem. Now, if you're familiar with the territory over there, is it a common thing to see rocks and stones? Yeah, they're everywhere. All over the place, about all you see. Right here it says that the king, when he's king, King Solomon, in his days at Jerusalem, he made silver and gold to be as stones. It's just everywhere. Abundance of riches. 1 Kings 10:27 is the parallel verse to that. It says a very similar thing. Made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones. Abundant riches. You can see, let's look at 1 Kings chapter 3. 1 Kings chapter 3 is Solomon comes into the throne. He makes a petition to the Lord for wisdom. Picking up here in verse 5, 1 Kings 3 and verse 5, it says, in Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give thee. And Solomon said, thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, and that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment, behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there is none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. He asked for wisdom, and the Lord grants that petition, but he says, because you didn't ask for it, I'm going to bless you with riches, prosperity. And you see that just blossoming with Solomon hereafter. If you go to 2 Chronicles 9, it gives us a listing of Solomon's riches. Fascinating passages here. 2 Chronicles 9. Look at this. 2 Chronicles 9:13. He says, Now the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Beside that which the chapmen and the merchants brought, and all the kings of Arabia and governors of the countries brought gold and silver to Solomon. And King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of beaten gold went to one target. 300 shields made he of beaten gold. 300 shekels of gold went to one shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. And there was 6 steps to the throne, and a footstool of gold which was fastened to the throne, and stays on each side of the sitting place, and 2 lions standing by the stays, and 12 lions stood there on the one side and on the other upon the 6 steps. There was not like made in any kingdom. And all the drinking vessels of King Solomon were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was not anything accounted of in the days of Solomon. For the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Huram. Every 3 years once came the ships of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks. And King Solomon passed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. And all the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom that God had put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and raiment, harnesses and spices, horses and mules, a rate by year. And on it goes there. Right? Just abundance, right? None of his drinking vessels were even of silver. They're all of gold, not to be accounted of in the days of Solomon. Glorious prosperity and riches. Ecclesiastes 2:4-10, if you want to write that down and read it later, that's Solomon himself giving an account of all the riches and abundance that he had. And so we see more wealth. So an expansion of the land here, great wealth, in the reign of Solomon especially, and all of that impacting the nation, right? Because word begins to get out about this. All the glory that's there. 1 Chronicles 14 verse 7 speaks of David's fame, how that he had a name that was known. 1 Chronicles 14 and verse 17 says, And the fame of David went out into all lands, and the Lord brought the fear of him upon all nations. During David's reign, that got started. The Gentiles out there, outside the borders of Israel, they've heard of David. They know the name. And they fear him. They don't stir up against him.
Yes.
Same thing's true of Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 4. First Kings 4. Verse 29. It says, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding, exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Herman, and Chalcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. And his fame was in all nations round about. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. And he spake of trees, from the cedar tree that is in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. He spake also of beasts, and of fowl, and of creeping things, and of fishes. And there came of all the people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all kings of the earth, which had heard of his wisdom. Solomon's there in all his glory and wisdom, and the nations are hearing it. Their kings are flowing under the king at Jerusalem to hear his wisdom. He got impact, influence upon the nations. And then one final passage on this point, 1 Kings chapter 10. 1 Kings chapter 10, you've got a prime example of this with the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba marvels at Solomon's wisdom and riches. And we have her coming to Solomon at Jerusalem here. 1 Kings 10, and it's also found in 2 Chronicles chapter 9. But we'll read 1 Kings 10, beginning in verse 1. It says, "And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions." Notice verse 1, it's the fame of Solomon that she's heard about, but it's fame in connection with what? Concerning the name of the Lord. Right? Jehovah. It's the issue we were talking about all back here. The Lord desiring to proclaim his name in all the earth, to have his name hallowed in all the earth. That's taking place, in a sense, under the reign of Solomon. And what they're hearing his fame concerning the name of the Lord, and she came to prove him with hard questions. Verse 2, "And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices, and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up unto the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. And she said to the king, It was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit, I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it." Get this now. She says, "And behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighted in thee, to set thee upon the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever, therefore made he thee king to do judgment and justice. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold and spices, very great store, and precious stones. And there came no more such abundance of spices as these, which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. And the navy also of Hiram, that brought gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir great plenty of almond trees and precious stones. And the king made of the almond trees pillars for the house of the Lord, and for the king's house, harps also, and psalteries for singers. There came no such almond trees, nor were seen unto this day. And King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. And she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants." You see back up in verse 7, it mentions that she mentions his wisdom and his prosperity. His prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. It's that issue of influence. That's why I say it's not just monetary. That's there, obviously. And that impacts the generation. That's what she hears. That's what draws her. There's no spirit in her when she sees it, because she says, back when I heard about all this, I heard it in my own land. Yeah. I heard it over there. I didn't even believe it. I had to come and see for myself what I was being told. And I come now, and there's no more spirit in me. And the glory of it not only exceeds what I didn't believe of what I heard in my own land, but the half wasn't even told me. Wasn't even half of the story of the glory and the riches and the prosperity that's going on in here. And she hears of the fame of the name of the Lord that's emblemized here in this interlude of mercy, especially King Solomon, the man of rest. Man of war with David, leading into the man of rest and the prosperity of the kingdom, all in God's mercy, his name being published out there among the Gentiles. It's pretty evident that the Lord is giving Israel a foretaste in this period of his kingdom calling for them.
Yes, sir.
That's the character of the time. And so we see those issues. Rest from their enemies, establishment of national righteous rule, and national prosperity. Amen. And the reigns of David and Solomon. Praise the Lord. We'll pick it up there next week. Continue on. Amen. Let's pray. Our God and Father, we are grateful for the time you've given us tonight. We pray that these many scriptures that we've looked at have been helpful in substantiating these points. And Lord, we thank you for the glory that we can see that goes to your name in this period of time, and we're thankful for it. And I pray that as we continue the study in the weeks to come, that we'll be able to build upon these foundational concepts concerning this time as we look at some further matters in relation to it. We give you the thanks and the praise and ask that you be glorified in all things. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.